I'm sure you spend a lot of time coding. So do I. A big part of my job is building things for developers. Sample apps, demos, new experiences in the docs, and so on. But I also spend a lot of time talking to developers. And since about last year, I noticed a very clear shift in how people build software. You can feel it in how fast features ship, how ambitious projects are, and how much small teams can accomplish in record time. So today I want to talk about what's behind this shift, coding agents, and how they're completely changing the way people build and ship software. So we're going to talk about three things: what coding agents are, what you can actually do with them, and how to get the most out of them. Since I work at OpenAI, I'm going to use Codex as an example because it's our own coding agents. It's the one that I'm the most familiar with after using it for hundreds of hours. But what I'm going to talk about today is relevant even if you don't use Codex yet. It's relevant if you want to stay relevant as a software engineer, because your peers are already using coding agents to build faster and better. And if you're not doing the same, you're just giving up velocity. All right, so let's start with the obvious question: what are coding agents? So you might have heard about vibe coding. If you haven't, it's a term that refers to AI-assisted programming, where you rely on vibes of an AI outputting code. So when you vibe code, you don't really think. You just tell a model what you want, and then you see the output, and you just accept it. The problem with vibe coding, even if it's great and it's fun, is that it doesn't really scale. So you end up sometimes spending more time fixing what the models broke rather than actually focusing on what you're building. But coding agents are different. They're not just AI that writes code. They're more like an AI software engineer that lives in your own environment, that has access to your whole code repo, that can run command, write files, and own tasks end to end. So they're really like having a team of super engineers always on call. They can plan, break down tasks into a sequence of steps. They can act, they can run shell commands, edit files, run tests, and they can adapt. So they can change course based on failures or new information. That's not vibe coding anymore. That's delegation. And sometimes they can do this not just in one interface, but everywhere you work. With Codex, for example, that looks like it can live in your terminal with the Codex CLI. It can live in your code editor with the IDE extension. And it can also run as a cloud agent, so as an asynchronous background agent that can run multiple tasks in parallel in the cloud. You can also use it on GitHub as a code review agent that can comment on your pull requests, on Slack, where you can tag Codex just like you would tag a teammate on a thread. And with the Codex SDK, you can also integrate Codex within your own application or environment. So the typical workflow with coding agent will vary based on the agent that you're using and also on your own personal preference. But what I like to do with Codex is to start new projects in the CLI, because in the CLI you can execute commands to run CLI tools, you can create new directories, and so that's a great way to get started. Then you can iterate there in the CLI, or with Codex, you can do that in the IDE extension until you get a good starting point. Once you have your starting point, or if you're just dropping into an existing project, you can define big, well-defined tasks that are independent. And on my side, what I like to do is to offload that to the cloud agent in the web interface so that it can just run in the background while I'm doing something else. And when you push new things, so for example, when you create a new branch that you edited yourself, or even if Codex helps you do that, you can use code reviews to have Codex review what you build and make sure that everything is right. So let's illustrate this with the real-life example. So usually for talks like this, I build a demo specifically for the talk, but for coding agents, I thought it was even more powerful to see how they work in the real world. We use it every day at OpenAI, and not just for demos or internal apps. And one thing that I've personally used Codex a ton for is developers.openai.com. It's our new website for developers that launched a couple of months ago. So it's a real app with millions of visitors, and let's see how Codex performs on that project. So let's give you also some context maybe for this website. So sorry, my clicker is not working anymore. It's fine. Just to give you some context, this website started initially as a way to kind of share resources for developers, but the intent is really to have one home, one place for everything. And so after adding resources like cookbooks and sample apps, we added more, such as docs, for example, Codex docs, apps SDK docs. We also added a blog. And so we haven't really updated our homepage yet to reflect these new changes. And so what I wanted to do here is to show you how we're actually going to use Codex to do that. And even though I already run the task, because coding agents, when they work on real-world projects, sometimes it can take a while to run a task, and we don't have all day, so I ran this before. But what I'm going to show you is the actual PRs in the actual code project. So this is really what's going to ship on our website. So you're actually the first ones getting a sneak peek of our new developers' home. So yeah, it's... I hope you like it. Don't tell anyone I showed you this before it actually launched. But yeah, so what I did is I started from the Figma that our designer worked on. And then I just gave Codex all of these screenshots, and I explained a little bit what I wanted it to do. So I explained that I wanted it to move the resources page to a new /resources path with all of the subpath and the corresponding redirects. I also explained what I wanted to do for the CTA cards and specify which background image I wanted to use. And I gave a little more context on what I wanted. But as you can see, it's not super detailed. It's really what I would say to a colleague that I'm just onboarding on the project. So let's see what Codex did. Here, I asked for 4 versions. So it's a feature that we call best of n. And it allows Codex to run the same task n times in parallel, and then you can choose which version you prefer. And on the web interface, you also have a preview feature that lets you kind of see what it looks like without having to check out the branch locally. So I actually preferred this version. So I created a PR. And this is what it looked like. Like, this is the raw unedited PR that Codex came up with. So as you can see, it's not perfect. It does contain every section that I asked, but there are a few things that are not exactly like in the Figma. So what I did is I created a new branch, and then I went into Cursor, my code editor, and updated each section one by one. So I gave more focused Figma screenshots for each section. So for example, I started with the hero cards. Then I asked to update the latest sections. Then I asked to update the Explorer section, etc. So this is really like Codex doing all the work. And every time, like, I'm giving some example code for the featured section. And so every time I'm just telling Codex, please do this, sharing a screenshot, and that's it. And so then I created a new PR. So as you can see, we have like commits for every section. And I asked Codex to review it. And it didn't find any major issues. Nice work. So that was perfect. And this is the results. So this is what Codex helped me build in just a few minutes. So I'm not going to merge this live because I do want my human coworker to also give their input. But as you can see, we've actually created this homepage in just a few minutes. You just had to give input to Codex, and it came up with the first version, and then that iterated again just a couple minutes every time while doing something else. So let me switch to the next slide. Okay, so this was just one example, but we have many other examples of how we use Codex internally. We used it extensively to prepare for Dev Day. So in the weeks leading up to Dev Day, we're using it for everything from building demos to writing docs to building the actual products themselves. And almost all of our engineers now use Codex, and they're merging around 70% more pull requests per week than before. And Codex reviews nearly every PR. But I don't just want to give internal examples, so let's talk a little bit about Codex in the wild. So benchmarks like SWE Bench Verified show that GPT-5 Codex, the model that's underlying the Codex product, hits almost 75% success on real-world GitHub issues. And then Cisco engineers, they use Codex to automatically review PRs for complex features, and that cut down review time by 50%. And Instacart uses the Codex SDK to integrate with their internal platform so that they can edit and test changes just at the click of a button. So when I say coding agents are redefining software development, I mean it quite literally. It's actually changed our own engineering culture quite a bit. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, cool, but how do I actually use this in a way that doesn't feel like another shiny thing? So I wanted to share a few patterns that I've seen work really well, both internally, but also for other devs using coding agents. So first thing, think of it like a teammate, or even like a team of mates that never get tired. So if you treat coding agents like a code vending machine, for example, you want to add auth and you just say add auth and hope that everything goes well, you're going to hit a wall pretty soon. And then you're going to get frustrated because you need to do a lot of fixing after the fact. So think of it this way. If someone joined your team last week, would they be able to complete the task with what you're telling the coding agent? Treating coding agents like new teammates means giving them proper context. You wouldn't just throw your new human teammates at the code base with zero docs, zero context, and be like, good luck, right? You would give them context. So the more you front load that context, the better the agent's work is going to be. And giving all that context, so you can do it a few different ways, but you can use the agent's MD file. So that's a new convention that many coding agents have already adopted. It's something that lives in your repo and that the coding agents will look for. So it's kind of like a README file, but for coding agents. And what you can do with agents.md, so what you can say in the file, you can write it as you want. You can just use natural language, but a typical agents.md file looks like this. You have instructions on what the project does, instructions on how to run it, how to run tests, how it's structured, where the API lives, where the UI lives. You can also specify design conventions like we use this design system, or coding conventions in general, we use this design system, we use Tailwind, we don't want to use that pattern, and any rules that might be relevant. And treating coding agents like teammates also means that you should tell them what you're expecting them to use. So if we come back to the add auth example, you might want to specify which auth service to use. Or like in the example that we just saw before, if you want to use images, you should tell the agent which images to use. Because if you don't, it will come up with something, but it might not be what you expect. And lastly, you can also split up tasks logically so that the coding agents can really own them end-to-end. So that way, it's the same as if you were onboarding several teammates on a project. Every person is working on a different part of the project, but it's a well-contained, self-contained task. And Other thing that you need to think about is to leverage all capabilities that you are offered. So for Codex, for example, it might be different from other coding agents, but coding agents in general are not just models, they're agents. So they're AI systems that can use tools, follow guidelines, and have several capabilities. So for Codex, a few capabilities that are worth calling out are, for example, the ability to run tests. So if you have a way to test your app, for example, that can just be, running a build that doesn't fail, but it can also be having unit tests. I even heard of people giving access to a headless browser so that the agent can actually try the app with an MCP server. We're going to talk about that in a second. But if you give the agent the ability to run tests, it will be so much stronger because it will be able to see failures and fix them without you having to intervene. Another thing is image inputs. So in my example, I literally gave Codex a Figma and said, match this. So it can read images and translate that into components, HTML, CSS, without you having to translate everything into text. So it's super powerful, especially for front-end features, but you can also give other types of images. And other thing, MCP servers. So for those who don't know, MCP, Model Context Protocol, is basically a way to plug in external tools and data sources into your agent. So you can add tools such as APIs, databases that are exposed through an MCP server and just let the agent use it to get additional context or data, for example, by querying a database. And last thing is to use coding agents everywhere, every time you can. So for example, whenever you're doing a PR, you can leverage code reviews to make sure everything looks great, because code reviews, they run in a separate environment. So it's kind of like looking at the code with fresh eyes, and it can find regressions, risky changes, and propose improvements, and then you can make the final call. And another thing is to launch Cloud Task whenever you can, for example, when you're going to lunch. So it became almost like a ritual for us, especially in the weeks leading up to Dev Day. We wouldn't leave our desk without running a Cloud Task. And then, for example, every time we went to lunch, we did that, and then we came back and we had a few PRs to review. So that's the beauty of it. You get a teammate that can work all the time, whenever, even if you're not, and then you just review what they've done. And last point is to use the Codex SDK if you need to. So it's pretty niche because it's very new. You might not have a use case for it yet, but if you have your own internal platform, you can actually integrate Codex as part of your own agent's capabilities. A more basic use case would be to use it inside your own CI. So this is a very new thing, so I'm sure you will see a lot more use cases pop up, but it's really exciting because it means you can leverage Codex's capabilities from everywhere. So I'm sure you might not have all tested coding agent, but by now you've understood that it's something that you should start thinking about. But if I had to leave you with 3 things, I would say think like a tech lead, because your job as a software engineer is increasingly to specify intent, to give context, to review code, and not to do things manually. Then, other thing to keep in mind, one of the few things to keep in mind after this talk is to set up your agents for success. So give them agents.md, give them tools, give them MCP server, give them the context that they need to be successful. And final thing, start now, because this isn't in a few years thing, right? It's something that engineering teams, including ours, are actually doing today. And the gap between teams that use coding agents and the ones who don't is already visible. And personally, I don't want to go back to a world where I spend a full day just doing like wiring layouts or doing repetitive refactors by hand. I'd rather spend my time thinking about architecture, designing user experience, talking to engineers, and let a coding agent handle all the boring parts. And I love you to have that same experience, less schoolwork, more creative work, and a couple of AI teammates who don't get mad when you give them tasks right before lunch. That's the dream. Thank you.